Setting up a meeting for Facebook Live. Meeting is now streaming live on Facebook. I'm not sure. Okay, yeah. Cool. I do believe that we are live on the Facebooks. So we can all wave to the Facebook people. And then we can all wave to each other. Then we can all wave to ourselves in the mirror. It's fun. Cool. Welcome, Facebookers. Welcome, all of you. I'm super glad that each one of you is here. I'm super glad that we're able to dive in and deepen the discussion. I'm appreciating this tighter, more intimate container. It's been super cool having those two conversations thus far, these Corona conversations. And super good that each one of you has been present on one or two of those calls and able to share in some of the ways we've dove in deep. And it's been great having more and more people present. And I'm so glad that now we're able to dive into this more intimate container where a small group of us are able to really dive deep. And I think that in doing so, we're going to be able to move through even more and uncover more and share even more clarity, which hopefully will serve each one of us on our personal journey, as well as serve everyone who's watching, whether live or after the fact. So the core intention, the core direction for this call that we're elucidating is facing fear. So looking right at fear. I think we've seen it come up a bunch on the first two calls, seeing it come up like where everyone's at, seeing what fears are arising in people, seeing what people are feeling, seeing what fears we're seeing in the world at large, and then how we're all relating to it. Seeing the ways we can be totally honest with ourselves, be honest in feeling that fear, honest in expressing and really being with it. Seeing the ways we can move courageously and move with that fear. And we've also seen the ways that we can run away from that, seeing the ways that we can create different belief systems, attach onto the beliefs, attach onto our ideas, and seeing the ways that can lead us from feeling the fear. So I think we've seen a lot of this. A lot of, like, the last one was what are we feeling and what ways can we escape from feeling? And so I think we got to witness a lot of that, a lot of the ways we can feel and a lot of the ways we can run from feeling. And so where I'm excited to move into with all of you in this space is just seeing how we can look at that, how we can move and look at fear, the ways it affects us, the ways we can move with it, and also look into society at whole and see how fear is at play in this whole coronavirus conversation at large. Thank you, Little. And so what I'd love for opening introductions would be maybe us going around just saying aloha, giving our name, hello, however, hello, little one. Thank you, Mama. And seeing sort of, so just sharing what we're feeling, who we are, and what this conversation means to you, what your feelings are, and how you are seeing and understanding this conversation around fear, and just keeping it to a few minutes, and then we'll move deeper as a whole. So feel free to, anybody, we'll just do the round table. So I'll go Cecily, and then you can call on someone after you, Cecily.
Okay. Aloha, my name is Cecily, and yeah, for me, what the invitation to this conversation feels like is an opportunity to actually maybe digest and break down some of what's been coming up over the last week or so. So I'm pleased to be here. I'm going to call on Katie.
Hello, Katie, and yeah, I'm looking forward to this conversation. I'm in a really good space today. I spent most of the day resting and taking care of myself and eating good food and being in love. And yeah, I mean, I look forward to speaking about fear because it's such a big part of our experience right now. And yeah, we've like come up against it in the last couple conversations, or in the last two. And I think it's a huge topic that that is worth exploring. I don't know how deep to get into right now, but I'm just looking forward to the opportunity to talk about the thing that that is sometimes demonized and sometimes really like people are afraid to talk about it. So yeah, I'll pass it off now to, let's see, to Max.
Hey everyone, my name's Max, calling in from the East Bay in California. I'm feeling excited to be on this call. It's been a good day so far, lots of yoga and meditation and finding ways to be productive from home. And curious and excited to see where we can go with this looking into fear together. It seems to be the predominant emotional flavor of our species experience at the moment. So yeah, blessed to be here with you all. And I think Michael is the last one.
Aloha, everyone. My name is Michael. I'm calling in from Northwest Arkansas. In this moment, I'm feeling calm and grateful for this container. I'm feeling some residual. This is the second time in a row that just prior to this container opening up, I experienced a pretty significant trigger and have come into it. And I can see that this conversation is like already designed to help me like work through what's left there. And I already did some of the processing myself. So grateful for the synchronicities there and grateful for the opportunity to speak and to hear and yeah, to be here. So thank you.
Phenomenal. Do we want to open with some breath, laughter, anything? Does anybody feel super called to lead? Michael, or unless somebody else wants to.
I'm available for it.
You leading it.
So I wanted to open up with sound. 3 cleansing ohms feels right now. So we'll take a deep breath in, and then on the exhale, we'll ohm. Breathing in and out with sound. Again, breathing in. We're feeling a little more clearer, potentially. Let's take some deep breaths in, and I'm gonna laugh on the exhale now. So we're gonna breathe in and exhale laughter. Last time. Just 30 seconds of silence to really settle into the body, checking in with our posture and our breath. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Cool. And so I'd love for this to be an open container. So like when he finishes, it does not mean that I need to necessarily lead us in. Like in any one of this, I'd love for all of us to feel empowered to, if we feel there's a direction that we'd really like to move the conversation in, and let's keep it going. I feel like each one of us has such beautiful gifts and such beautiful clarity. And so yeah, I just empower all of us to continue to step into that. And it's, yeah, useful for me as well. I really appreciate your share, Michael. I really appreciate your vulnerability about how coming into this, you're moving from a triggered space. I can definitely relate to that. I've been moving through some very challenging spaces here. And I think each one of those challenging spaces I come up is like, cool, what's the real emotion? What's present that I'm not feeling? Am I feeling anger? Like a lot of times it's been anger that I haven't been feeling. Sometimes sadness that I've been feeling, and sometimes fear that I've been feeling. I think they're all super deeply connected. And so I'm appreciating the way that all of these challenging spaces in relationship are deeper opportunities to look and see the different patterns that we have coming up. And I really appreciate your share with laughter and the breath and the ways that has helped to move. I feel a lot clearer and a lot lighter. Even as I'm still with some of that, it feels so much lighter and clear, and I feel so much more connected into this space. So thankful for that.
I have something I'd like to share. So this came up for me today because, as we all know, there's a lot of story going on around why this is happening and what is happening. And some of it's like, you know, we're getting ready for martial law. Some of it's like we're entering this new like time on the planet where we're going to build a more sustainable culture. Um, and so there are so many different angles that are kind of floating in the atmosphere. And one of the things that came through for me today as I was in my own dealings with this thing was that for me, and people will be different with this, but for me, it felt like when I start to go into story about what this is and why it's happening, that I maybe then become more disconnected from my power to create and actually tell a story and create reality from a clear space because I'm then connecting into these narratives, and rather than creating, I'm reacting or responding to these beliefs that are held in our collective. So that's what came through for me today. It doesn't really make me immune to having to reclaim my sovereignty from some of them, because there are some narratives that feel very dense and heavy and dark and scary as well. So it doesn't make me immune to sometimes getting a little bit lost in those, but I noticed that I was able to regain sovereignty today and actually come to some solid ground around my own personal space. So that was my experience with fear today. And I feel complete.
Thank you for sharing, Cecily. I resonate really deeply with what you just shared about the different storylines going on. To keep it somewhat, I won't go too far into it, but I feel like there's a lot of like almost timelines happening in a way, and different people are living these like different realities. And we're at this point now where there's so many things coming to a head. And I've come to many of the same conclusions. And like in a way, that has been the most clear way for me to kind of release the fear that is all around me. And whatever story is true, or if they're all true, or if none of them are true, doesn't necessarily matter. What my like truth is to be very much in my body and very much focused on what's in front of me. And a lot of that has included being in a rest state, like really taking things low, and easy and slow, and staying in like an awareness. Like I see all these different things and these threads being woven, but I also see how they don't really affect me. Like I have to go so far out of my body to make any of them actually like link into my story that I'm living. At some degree they do, but there's really no way that I can directly affect them or change them. And so until that really does arrive, it's just be aware of them and stay embodied. And yeah, so it's been lots of self-practice for me, and it's been really enjoyable. And I've noticed the times when I do get caught in fear loops or start to get triggered, or when I'm in these other stories that have been like placed upon me and I'm accepting as my own reality. And like we all live in this like shared reality, but mine right now is very focused in, and I'm really grateful for that. So, thank you for like inspiring that to come through. I feel complete.
Yeah. Michael, yeah, I love that share. I love your share, Cecily. I feel like we're kind of speaking to a similar or having a similar process. And I have too been pulled into lots of different stories and trying to figure everything out, wanting to know. And then kind of coming back to myself and leaning really heavily on the practices that I've been cultivating and developing for so many years before this pandemic began. And one thing that I was thinking about, Michael, when you were talking was like, you're talking about your own reality, what's right in front of you. And that's been my intention in my practice, is to be more in tune with what's actually happening in front of me, where I can be of service, where I can take care of myself, be in my body. And then I just had this thought as you were speaking, and I was like, what if every single person on earth was doing that? What would it look like if every single person pulled themselves out of the story and started taking care of their body, taking care of their family, right? Your neighbors, your community, your state, your country. What would that look like? You know, we're trying so hard to understand what's really going on so we can fight against what's really happening. What if we like let go of that a little bit? What would that look like? Complete.
I wanted to add something that came up while you were sharing, Katie, and that is like um, when we allow ourselves to get caught in figuring out um, the the why behind something that's happening, it's a lot of energy that we're spinning, and it's creating a lot of stress in our systems because our mind's in sort of like a frenetic state where it's like, what is going on right now? And it can become feverish that way as it searches for an answer. And so thank you for saying what you were saying about, hey, what if we all pull our energy back from these storylines that are going on right now and actually drop into ourselves, our friends, our family, the things that do feel good to us, nature, what then happens to our reality as a collective? It's a very powerful question to ponder. And I feel complete.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel like there's this desire to know. It's like we all want to know what's going on. We want to have a clear picture. We want to know. And so I think within that there's like a fear sometimes that arises within us of not knowing. I know for myself, I haven't gotten caught in too many of the stories. I haven't even dove into too much. But then all of a sudden, somebody sent me a channeling, and I so rarely watch like these channelings, like a psychic doing a channeling or reading or whatever. and I heard it, and it was like saying a bunch of stuff which seemed really far out, but I was like, wow, that feels really good. And I'm like in that, and I'm like, wow, it feels really good to believe that that's what's going to happen. And so I see so much how we can go in and be like, okay, that belief feels really good, so I'm gonna believe this, and then feel really good. But then it's like, when that's not the case, has that feeling good actually distracted us from feeling what we can know here? And so it's like, what can we know, and how do we know, and how much can we let go of knowing what we can't know?
Hmm.
Yeah, I like that, AG. I've been thinking along similar lines recently. I was having the thought of how, particularly in New Age communities, there's often this associating what feels good with what's true.
Hmm.
So, and so I was just sort of thinking through ways in which that is potentially very problematic. Like, shooting up on heroin probably feels good. It doesn't mean it's an adaptive strategy for addressing whatever is making you not feel good. And I think similarly, various forms of magical thinking can be in a similar category in that way, where they can make us feel good, at least temporarily, but are potentially making us less well equipped to be with and address what's actually happening. And so, like, I mean, we all do it to some extent. We all live in fantasies to some extent. It's part of what human minds do. And there's like I've been finding my own thinking kind of oscillating between, like, okay, you know, the the world is on a verge of a kind of like mass civilization collapse. This probably won't be the thing, but probably in a few more years with ecological whatnot, it will be, you know, and it's going to be a shit show, and there's going to be immense death and suffering and blah, blah, blah. And then kind of going to like, okay, we're on the verge of this like unraveling of egocentric consciousness, and we're going to come into a more community minded, awakened condition collectively, where we're doing group sense making in really harmonious ways and operating together with our intuition, creating these amazing synchronicities. And I'm like, what's actually what's occurring to me is what's actually happening is probably like a bit of both of that. You know, and I think there's like you know, to operate together in groups, we need to have some sort of shared narrative. Otherwise, we're just like, you know, we're fucked. We don't have a coordinating mechanism then to be directing our behavior as a group. And so, you know, you see different subcultures in different countries kind of glomping together with a particular narrative, and then that creates group cohesion, and it's adaptive for that group. We're in this weird time now with you know, this postmodern world, and with Facebook and everything, where there's so many narratives happening simultaneously, and we like, you can't even really isolate yourself from them that well, even if you try. I mean, if you're on the internet, you know, it's like we're all going to be to some extent overwhelmed by the plethora of perspectives. And it's like, yeah, how do we make sense of that, and how do we act in wise and discerning ways with what information we're deeming to be useful, and also not become overwhelmed by the fear of the more fear-inducing perspectives, and just the overwhelm of so many perspectives. So a way that I've been trying to deal with this personally is spending some time every day trying to understand what's happening. Listening to people that I consider more intelligent than me, more insightful, more connected, whatever, and trying to understand what's happening in a big picture way. And often in that process, fear comes up for me. And so then also every day spending time doing things that just make me feel really good and settle my nervous system, breath work and meditation and yoga and nature and these things. So I'm trying to find a balance in my personal experience with those things. That's it for now.
I really appreciate that balance you speak of actively moving towards understanding and also actively working to calm the nervous system, to bring deeper relaxation in. I think that doing that creates a good space to support that understanding, to be able to integrate in a good way. And I really love the points you made about like how we tend to use a shared narrative to create a sense of unity, and also that understanding it's like this narrative is going to inherently conflict with this narrative, and this narrative conflicts with that, and so all the narratives are there. And so for me the question becomes, what does it look like for us to come together without creating some narrative that could inherently have conflict with other narratives? What does it look like to come together without that?
And then I wonder if maybe that's sort of what we're doing right now. And I don't get the sense that any of us are particularly grasping onto any narrative of what's happening. And perhaps that's why we're able to communicate together in a relatively amiable way.
So I got a lot of excitement flowing through me as you were sharing, AG. Thank you, Max. Thank you, AG. Beautiful stuff. And I felt like an integration point just came up in my awareness, where Katie earlier spoke on like everybody, if they were to drop in their own body and just live their own experience. And then AG is like, well, then how do we create this, like how do we find some shared point? Well, my personal view on reality is that humans are storytellers. We are the storytellers, and like my core meme in that is we are the stories we tell ourselves. And if each one of us is telling our own embodied story, we'll see commonalities with other people who are telling their own embodied stories, and that's where we get to organically create these new threads of reality. It's not an external, like, this is what's happening in the world, so I do this. It's I'm doing this, and together we can create this thing. And I just like, that's kind of how it's always been, but we get away from that, or at least I've seen a lot of people get away from that and want to live into these like overarching streams that are maybe like the source is unknown rather than coming from the source that is you. So I guess what this is coming through is like, I see what I'm doing more is I'm telling my own story and I'm really living my embodied experience, and I'm sharing a lot of that. And exactly what Max spoke on is that's what we're doing right here, is like getting in these conversations, finding cohesion, communicating clearly is how we come together and create these new meta narratives together rather than attaching onto something that's like pre-existing and served to us from an unknown source. Yay, thank you.
Yeah, I really love what you had to say, Michael, about, I've loved what everybody has had to say. You know, going back to what Max was saying and then tying it into what Michael just shared. Yeah, humans are storytellers, and culture is built on beliefs and values. And so culture works best with smaller groups because there is room for individuality. And then once culture gets very large, it becomes adherence to identity. So I think that with the internet and social media and, you know, the country we live in, we can be prone to seek an identity in some form through story. And so that's when we have to take a deep breath and come back into our bodies and ask ourselves what it is that we value. And do we value living the story that somebody else is telling us, or do we value our sovereignty and the ability to source our own story and what that means for us moving in the world? It's challenging to do because I think that culturally, many people, not just in our country, but across the planet, are in pure survival mode. And their fear reflexes are engaged a lot of the time. And so there isn't access to higher reasoning a lot of the time when we're in that space. And I've certainly been there. Um, there is, I suppose, only so much that I feel I can say on this topic, simply because of some of the challenges I'm seeing pop up with this pandemic, in that the haves and have-nots are, there's a, seems to, that there is appearing a greater gulf between those two. And so I suppose presently I see a cultural issue that needs to be addressed. And that ties back into what story are we willing to tell ourselves, and about the culture that we're living in and want to live in. I am going to close my thoughts for now, and feel complete for now, but I may have something to add later.
Thank you, Cecily. Yeah, I think that allows us to move in a really good direction of like, what are these cultural issues that need to be addressed? What are these sort of systemic issues that we're seeing in our culture, where all of a sudden our culture, whatever our culture, our society, all of this, something like this happens, there's a threat, and then there's this huge response to it that creates this idea and this fear that's so much greater than the actual threat. Because it's like clear that there's any sickness, there's going to be a threat, but my observation has been that on the large, the reaction has been completely overblown, and that there's been so much more fear that's been spread. Like I went for a walk. I think I might show this in another video. I went for a walk the other day and was just blown away by how present, like just like feeling the mental space. Like when this was my own experience, but like my own experience was walking through like a grocery store and like feeling like, wow, there is a lot of sickness, but it's like people are sick with the idea of being sick much more than people are sick with the actual idea, which was just, again, just how I was perceiving it. But I think it's, what's clear to me is that there is a tremendous amount of fear that is being surfaced in our society through this, whether that's fear of getting sick, fear of dying from the sickness. There's a lot of that. Fear of not being able to have food on the table, fear of all of these things that we've become conditioned to going away. And so I see a lot of fear that is being really brought up, and I think it is a sign of our culture and where our culture is at, that we've at large had this response, had this reaction, not just in America, but in the whole world. And so I wonder what we can understand about that, about our culture, about what our relationship to fear as a culture is, and about what this experience, this coronavirus pandemic, about what this is showing us. And yeah, I'd start with that. I want to start with that. Someone might have something good for that.
Thanks, AG. I feel like the all-encompassing fear that you speak to is the fear of the unknown. And I really like how you're talking. I mean, I can talk about the whole world, but I live in United States of America, and this is the culture I've grown up in. I know them, I'm most familiar with. And I know here we've grown up with incredible abundance, and whether you're super wealthy or on the other end of the spectrum, there is a knowing that there's like a store where you can go and buy food and like it'll just always be there. Like we're not living in a so we've gotten really accustomed to knowing, like, to having some other source like provide for us, and then when that is threatened, we're like, wait, like for me what's come up is like, oh shit, like I haven't been growing my own food and I've kind of wanted to for a long time, or I haven't. So I'm like I find myself going into a fear state of like, I don't know, of around there. And then as well, personally, like I've had some major health problems in my life. So I question, and am I part of this immune compromised group? Like, am I extra susceptible to this virus? And then the stories of like, the virus might not even exist. And so then you're like in this headspace, or I don't know, sorry, I'm getting a little off, but like, I'm noticing in myself and others, because I'm part of the collective that we all talk about. I'm feeling the collective fear. I'm part of that. Like I have fear too. And sorry, I feel like I've lost my train of thought a little bit. But yeah, really just coming back to this fear of the unknown, like we really don't know what's going to happen. There's this like anticipatory potential major threat. And then also a lot of stories talking about like the actual like whether or not this even is a threat. And so it's like you're just constantly it's possible to constantly be cycling through. And honestly, I mean, like what we talked about is like the only antidote that I'm finding is just being like present in my body and being so yeah, that's like as far as I've gotten. I haven't gotten to how are we addressing poverty, how are we addressing like the huge divisions that are happening, that are being amplified by this experience. I will say that this is such a small thing, but I recently found this like Instagram feed that was just sharing good news about this experience, about what's happening in the world. And it's like, this really wealthy person is donating $5,000 to like 100 people, or like, and so it's like all these little things. And I was in tears watching it because I'm like, these things aren't being shared, but these are happening. Like real people are actually being inspired to do good things. And there's a ripple effect in that. And I'm if there's a narrative that I want to get behind, it's that human beings will respond in these ways. If we have resources, perhaps there will be an awakening and a new way of focusing these resources. And maybe it's not going to come from the higher ups. Maybe it's coming from regular individuals, regular people. Sorry, that was a whole lot and I went on a big thing, but thanks for bearing with me.
Good. Yeah, I really appreciate Jared. I appreciate those shares as well of like, look at this. Oh, nature, like all of a sudden the canals in Italy are clear and the birds are chirping outside and nature's healing and the earth is healing. And yeah, I love that because it seems like there are narratives being spun in a lot of our like culture that excludes those things. Like the narratives are trying to paint a certain thing. I also want to say, Katie, I really admire the way you're looking at yourself as you're communicating, and I see you constantly adjusting to communicate in a more and more honest way. So I just want to say I really saw that and admired that. Super beautiful how you communicate. So yeah, it's like the question that I would ask is like, okay, if this narrative is excluding all that, then there's this narrative is why is it that we as human beings feel a need to create these narratives in the first place?
I thank you for posing that question. And in my experience, I come back to what I'd shared is like we are storytellers. Like we're gonna keep talking, and there's almost this like, I don't know if it's programmed or if it is part of like the human essence. I'm still not clear on that, but we want to be able to talk about more than what we are doing or what is like directly here with us. And so there's that like want to like share these beautiful things that make us feel good, and we want to share that out so other people feel good. And that's kind of where it spirals out, where it's not totally checked in with everybody's experience. But in that, a personal friend of mine that I know and trust, who they shared a picture of the LA skyline that was like LA, no smog, beautiful day, that just like had my heart like swelling, and that felt true. And there's some things that would regularly like could be seen as like fear inducing, but when I really feel it's true, it's not scary so much, it's almost relieving. Like it's heavy stuff to take on, but I don't react to it in like this clamp up, shut down state. I can accept it because even if it is difficult, I can feel it's true. And that's just like I don't know how to share that other than it's just something I feel in my own being. Yeah, and I wanted to share a personal story about fear. It might like shift a little bit, but this is kind of like a story from me today that it's been weighing on me for about like a week and a half, where I've been in this like flip back and forth of like, do I have coronavirus? Am I exposing my family members? And that's been my biggest fear, of not so much of do I have it, am I at risk, but who am I potentially exposing? And that has been at times a debilitating fear in my reality. And frequently over the past like week or so, I've felt moments come on where I feel like I'm feverish, and I felt like stuff going on in my throat. And today I woke up and had this kind of like full realization that it definitely is allergy season. I live under a bunch of oak trees that are dropping pollen like crazy. And this is part of my every year pattern that I go through this for about a week or two. And the one like symptom that I was experiencing that was really blowing me away was I felt like I had a fever coming on at certain times throughout the day. And I would get like hot, I'd feel flushed, and I took my temperature. I have a thermometer, and I took my temperature a lot over the past week. It never showed a fever, but I kept experiencing it, and it kept like really weighing on my heart, and I was like isolating myself even from my own family in our house. And today I realized that I needed to look a little bit deeper into another nutritional truth in my life, and I was doing some research there. And one of the things that came around was nutritional yeast, something that since I've been at home a lot, cooking a lot of my own meals, I've been incorporating a lot of nutritional yeast into almost every meal I cooked. And I looked up the fortification ingredients in nutritional yeast, which is niacin, one of them. And I know I am sensitive to niacin, and niacin creates facial flushing. And so I have had no temperature, but I have had the heat on my face a lot. And it's been correlated about a couple hours after a meal every single time it's come up. I've thought back through every single day, and I realized that I was in a fear loop thinking that anything that looks like a symptom is making me sick, rather than being fully aware of what I was actually doing in my own body. And so I had a good laugh about it today of like seeing where those like the fear narrative that's outside of me, when it actually comes in and integrates into my reality, it's nothing to be afraid of. It's something that I just need to know about and know what's going on. Thank you for letting me share. I thought that was a really silly story.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Yeah, I think it brings up a really good point of how irrational some of our fears are. Like we rationalize our fear. We like have a fear and we rationalize it. Like, okay, yep, I'm afraid of that, and it's totally rational and it's totally reasonable that I'm afraid of that. And here's all these reasons why. And then all of a sudden we have like that moment of clarity, and it's like, wow, none of that was actually rational. Like none of that was actually logical for me to be thinking that, but I convinced myself so deeply of it. And so I think it's beautiful to like look at the ways that we can make ourselves afraid, like just using our epic, beautiful, powerful minds that are capable of creating all these amazing things are also capable of creating these like weird prisons within ourselves of like these ideas. And so I think it's a really beautiful story in the way you were able to illustrate that through that share.
I have a query. So I'm along that line. What was occurring to me is, you were saying how we can realize that much of our fears are irrational and unnecessary. And then what's occurring to me is like, in a really expanded state of consciousness, or a mystical state of union, or something like that, which I'm suspecting many of the AG Friends List watchers of this have experienced in some flavor or other. There can be a sense of that, like, fear is completely irrelevant, you know, that everything is utterly taken care of, that everything is so interconnected and divinely orchestrated, and that it's completely inseparable, and we're all an expression of the same eternal undying being, you know, knowing itself in diversity. And so then what's occurring to me is, like, if we've had a state like that, and then we come back to a more normal human-like condition, and first come up, which it tends to do, what would be a wise and useful way of relating to fear?
What is an intelligent way to relate to fear when we recognize that it's not? Yeah. I was having a conversation with a friend, and she was pointing to, like, different like fears, like psychological fear, as like all these ideas we create, and then like actual fear of an actual threat, like fear as in a response of the body. Like if a tiger's chasing us, then it's reasonable to be afraid of that tiger because that's an actual threat to our safety in that moment. But that doesn't mean we should be afraid of tigers if we're walking through like the Empire State Building, like, because that would be irrational. There's no reason for that fear to still be there, but then we like carry that fear. And so it's like, yeah, I appreciate that question. I'm curious if anybody else has anything on that.
Well, what you just said brought something more to mind for me, which is that, so, you know, people will often talk about this distinction that, like, we have this instinctual animal fear when our body is threatened, you know, or whatever we're identified with is threatened. And it's a physiological response, and it, you know, gets us in a state when we're able to fight or run away or do things that are adaptive in the situation. And then, you know, part of why humans have been so successful is because we've evolved to this extraordinary and, as far as we know, unique cognitive capacity for species on the planet, which allows us to model things abstractly and then predict things, like predict into the future more effectively than other species. But then the price that we pay for that ability is anxiety, and our bodies don't know the difference, you know, between, like you were saying, between the fear that's created by thought and the fear that's created by an actual situation unfolding. So it's sort of, it's like a blessing and a curse. I mean, it's like, it's it's what has allowed us to completely take over the biosphere. Whether or not that's a good thing, I don't know. And it's also, like, you know, what can leave so much of the population with so much angst. I don't know.
So I wonder where we see that playing out within this coronavirus situation, where we see like the actual threats, where we see what we've created, like what's the actual threat that's present here, and what have we as a culture created in relation to that.
I think that there is a lot that comes up for me around this. I'll speak for what it's bringing up for me. You know, I think it's bringing up fear of loss of control, which ties directly into a survival mechanism to be able to predict what's going to happen next. Because I find myself unable to do so. And that creates fear for me. And today I really dealt with some grief over the loss of normalcy, and maybe the fear that what I have known as normal isn't, maybe that's just gone. And so I think there was a fear and a grief there as well. Um, I do think fear can be incredibly expansive, and I've certainly felt very expansive during parts of this. Um, I have felt fear that, I potentially could be carrying the virus and not know and exposing people I love. So that fear has been present as well. Um, there's definitely been like some paranoia around symptoms and that things my body are feeling. But to go back, something that's been helping me has been sitting with my fear and actually leaning into like worst case scenarios. Okay, so like, what if this is, you know, the end of the road? Like, and meditate on, and I'm, be with death, basically. Let's sit with my mortality, the mortality of my family members, the things that I hold dear. Right now, I'm on our farm here in Arkansas, and this is my grandparents' farm, and um, it's our farm now. They've passed on. Anyway, it's a place that I hold dear, and there's a fear around um, losing these things, and so I have had to um, walk with those fears a bit, and then for me, I feel that that's where the expansion has the potential to come in. Um, I think we're still so early on in all of the mechanics of all of this to know what that expansion may look like or what the result of it might be. But I think the practice it provides peace and comfort to me. So I feel complete.
Cecily, thank you. I really deeply appreciate your willingness to go to those really dark places. I think it's highly necessary just in a human life, or high, maybe not necessary, but it I don't know. It's a really powerful practice in any circumstances of human life, and especially now to really like get down to that like very basic understanding of our mortality. Um, when we're talking about attaching to all these narratives, especially what AG alluded to in the beginning when talking about the channel bringing in this like beautiful possibility and how good that feels, right? And I think a lot of, I'll just say it, those of us who are latching to that narrative, to some of those like narratives that are saying, don't worry, just hang out, everything's going to be okay, they're taking care of it for us, we're going to be fine. I think that is a real avoidance of feeling this very real reality that our lives, whether or not there's a, we're in a pandemic or not, our lives end. And this is bringing that to the forefront, and dealing with that is painful. And even, I have also sat with the knowing that I will die, and I've been okay with it. And even still, I'm still scared of it. And and I feel like I'm a little more equipped possibly than others, but at least I'm talking about it, and we're talking about it. But it's a real scary thing, and it's important. I really think it's important right now, because if we can actually sit with that, then we can, you know, choose we can, I think, navigate through these narratives and these stories with just like a little more groundedness. At least we've looked at that part of ourselves, and then I think, you know, taking in these different stories, we can take it in with a different perspective, and I think a more grounded and more realistic perspective. I feel like that is kind of the prerequisite to being able to really create a story that is more true to ourselves. Yeah.
Would y'all be open to me sharing something from the Facebook chat? Someone had a
Sure.
Cool.
Yeah.
Zachary Lundberg says, I think it's important to have an objective perspective of the advantages we have as specific races, genders, and privileged positions. The loss of control brings about fear. However, the fear is the stitch that binds us as human beings, as does love. Mortality that we all perish, and evolving in empathy for those whom are a lot less secure, safe in their mortality, be it their race, immune system, etc. We still have detention centers, immigrants taken from their homes, put into very severely under hygienic spaces. Fear can be used intelligently to evolve empathy for our fellow humans and to become more inclusive with our ability to accept the full spectrum of perspective. With that, it can allow us to come to a fuller appreciation of all life and take fuller action to bring about the liberation of all sentient beings when this time of deep surrender ceases. That's a really healthy, evolved perspective.
Wow.
Yeah, I really love it. Hmm. I
Yeah.
also agree. I think fear and facing our mortality actually strengthens us, and it can increase our empathy. This is a hope that I have, is that through this, um, we can lift one another, and specifically lift those that are far less fortunate, less well resourced. Uh, you know, the problems, the suffering is so intense and immense that it can be very challenging, because not one single person has the answer to it, and that's when it becomes a collective effort. And so prior to this pandemic, Michael and I had actually taught a workshop on creating culture, and I was specifically going into these issues that we're facing on a broad scale, and um, working to generate social responsibility and social action and self-sufficiency in the way that we take responsibility for our culture. Because as Katie was saying earlier, um, a lot of people have abdicated responsibility for their lives to this easy access convenience. I'm not really sure that we would have a common name for it that we could call it and maybe know it, but the system, maybe we can just call it the system. Being able to go to the store, pick up anything we want, pick up something we've never even heard of before, get it delivered to us the next day, and just the sheer amount of abundance that so many of us have access to. Um, so I see that as well. And I have I've done that too, so I've also relied on the system, and maybe not been as responsible as I could have been in the past. So thank you for sharing that on the Facebook live, on the comment section. That was a good thing to hear. I feel complete.
Thank you. And Zane Marchball, that it could also lead to courageous action, following up on that share. I think that's another really good point, that like this fear, like if we're fully with our fear, it can lead to empathy and a deeper sense of connection. And also, if we're fully with our fear, it can lead to us acting courageously. Like we might be afraid of that lion that's leaping at us, but that might awaken in us a greater courage to do something, to knock that lion away, to do what we need to do to save our family, whatever. And so it's like being fully with that fear and then acting courageously. So the fear is not controlling us, but we're not resisting or running away from the fear.
So what came alive for me is kind of my process that I've been through when I sense fear in others. I haven't been in a physically social area in like almost 2 weeks now. But I encounter a lot of people online. I'm spending a lot of my time interacting with other people online. And if I see or sense fear being predominant in what they are sharing and expressing, I have been really proactive in asking, like, how are you feeling and what do you need? Those have been like my two most common questions with so many people. At first asking availability, but when I do engage in conversation, those are the two questions that come up. And it's pretty amazing how quickly, once somebody realizes that like their fear reaction and what they're going through as their story and what they're living in as their story, when they reduce it down to what they actually need, it's something much simpler and much more tangible, and they're no longer in this like state. And so as far as like acting courageously, like reaching out to people and starting communications has not always been the easiest thing. So I've seen that in my own experience. And of course, I'm like from the safety of my own house and very comfortable, but I still see in my story like that is coming alive in me. So thank you for sharing that from I didn't catch the name, but whoever shared that, thank you for bringing that up, because I'm experiencing that. And I would like to empower others to do the same. Like if you see somebody in a fear state, ask them what they're feeling. And if they're not willing to talk about it, that's okay. But if they are, find out what they need. Why are they in that state? And you can use that. Like we all have the ability to help comfort even from a distance. And if it's a physical, tangible need, we also have these amazing networks that are popping up all over the world for getting needs to people who need them. Like, so.
Totally. Yeah. Thank you for
Yeah.
pressing that.
Yeah.
To reach out. And I think it also like points to something like why that's courageous is something I've been seeing myself. It's like if someone else is afraid and I don't want to speak, then it's like usually I'm afraid of their fear. Like that's one thing I have noticed. I have like can have a tendency to be afraid of somebody else being afraid. I'm like, okay, if they're afraid, what's that mean? What's that going to mean for humanity? And I create fear within myself based on another person being afraid, which is why it's an act of courage to, even if have some fear that they're afraid, which is usually it's really just like a psychological fear, but to be with that, to notice, okay, I'm feeling fear that this person's afraid, and then to courageously take that step forward and be like, okay, I'm still gonna do it. I noticed that when I was going for a walk earlier, I was out in some park and there were a bunch of things and I crossed a lot of people. And so I got to notice what my different responses and reactions were with people. And I found myself like just still saying aloha, even if I like felt this nervous energy or I was like feeling whatever with them, to still just say aloha and create that connection. And sometimes I would do it and like there was one time where I was like feeling a little weird and I wasn't totally in it and I like said something and like this I could, again, just my perspective, but what I perceived was this guy's eyes like were really big and he was like, I don't know how to respond to this guy right now, was how I perceived it. And so yeah, being courageous about communicating with others even when we might be afraid to communicate because of something we perceive within them feels really valuable.
Yeah, so along those lines, the thought just came to me that the fear or resistance that we have to facing our own fear is similar to the fear that we have of facing other people's fear, right? And it's like when we see someone that's afraid, our mirror neurons go off, and we, to the degree that we're empathetic, we feel fearful as well. And so it's like what you just expressed, AG. It's like that can happen inside and outside and everywhere, like wherever fear is present, and there's the internal resource and capacity to actually be with it without being overwhelmed, then we can entrain to more coherent and less fearful states of being together. It's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to speak to speaking to people in public. I have found in the last several weeks, like, yeah, yes, those moments of like, how do I even interact with this person? Like, there's a person there. Am I a threat? Are they a threat? Like, it's like this whole new way of relating that's so bizarre and so different from how we've always been. And I'm also finding that there are more people walking around on the street, like in the neighborhoods, because that's like all we can do right now. And waving from afar. And this hasn't really happened. Like, I live in Boulder, and people are super friendly here, but you're not usually like waving from across the street like, how you doing? Good, and that is like, that's the vision that I always have for neighborhoods. It's like, you walk out, you say hi to your neighbor, and I love that. And so it's not, this comment isn't really related to fear, but I just really want to presence that, because on the flip side of fear, without going into the like, love is the opposite of fear, and if I just feel love all the time, everything's going to be good. But actually, from a grounded place of knowing like fear exists and it's real, and also I want to, from that space, like, continue to share connection with people in the ways that we can, given these like new bizarre um like realities that of boundaries that we're creating. um I don't know, I'm just really lately into the good things that are happening, like I mentioned before, and seeing them on these, like, like, we're forced to be with our families, so we're forced to face some stuff maybe we weren't facing before. We're forced to connect with our neighbors a little bit more. We're forced to um yeah, so I know I'm kind of tangenting off, that's not a word, but I'm getting off of the track of fear. But the other side of fear, I can't, I don't know, I have to bring that into the conversation. um yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it's not, sorry, go ahead. I don't
You
I was just gonna say, like, I am playing a lot with this, like, bypassing fear, and then also like living in love, with fear also existing, because I think a meme, or like a narrative in um, the sort of like high vibe spiritual community, is that fear is bad and love is good. And if you just vibe super high and you're just always in love, that like fear won't be able to touch you. And if you express any kind of fear, then you're bad, and there's something wrong with you, and you need to go home and look at yourself, and vibe higher. And I feel like that is actually fear of feeling fear, like being afraid of fear, being afraid of all these things that we're talking about: fear of death, fear of the unknown, fear of scarcity and lack. um yeah, so, but like, why not live in a world where fear and love can exist, and one is not, good or bad? I think love is good. I love love, so
Can we love fear too?
yeah, can we love fear? Can we give fear a right to exist? Can it just exist?
I like what you said, being in love, including fear, like including fear in love.
Yeah. I just posted something like that about a week ago, before things got really serious, and I was hearing a lot of that narrative as well. Don't give in to fear. I was like, well, this is scary, and it's actually hitting a lot of. And I think there's three main areas. It's like a threat to ourselves or people we love, not able to control the situation, and then one other thing that sort of hits the primal spots of the brain all at once, and it was all three of them. But I like to think that fear and love are actually the same thing sometimes. So for me, I feel fear out of love for my family and a sense of protection. And so for me, sometimes inseparable. I won't say all the time, but often inseparable. They go together. I feel complete on that one.
Epic. I had this feeling. What if we go around in a circle or a pentagram, whatever, and just do a quick answer of a question: what is love? What is fear?
That feels hard.
I'm wondering if any of us actually really know what either of those things are.
What do we give it our best, understanding that we're never like it's just our perspective. It's that say like this is what it is to me. Like, and I'll start. How about that? And if you guys want to, epic. If you don't want to, also epic.
Okay, fair.
Cool. So, what is love and what is fear? What is love? To me, love is sharing. Love is what connects us. Love is a free flow of energy and an opening of perspective, so that I am not seeing myself as other than that which I love. And so love to me is when I open to see another as I would see myself, and allow for a free flowing of energy between me and that other, or me and that whole. That is what love is to me. And what is fear? Fear is a feeling that arises to protect me from a real or an imagined threat.
I've got some answers. Thank you for that, Beauty. Thank you for the question. So fear, I see fear as awareness of a need not being met without the mental ability to meet that need. So there's no cognitive way. So we go into this, or at least in my experience, I go into this like shut down state of I don't know how to meet this need, and I know that I need it. Whereas love is also awareness, but love is awareness of all my needs are met, and I see clearly how all those needs are met. And the more love I feel is the more clearly out I can see how all those needs are connected. I feel complete.
Yeah, so what came through for me is that love is a nurturing awareness, and then fear is a nurturing awareness. Yeah. So I'll end there for now.
Let's see. I think I'm going to go with a couple frames for this. So, love as a complex bonding mechanism process that has evolved in mammals over millions of years. Makes us feel good and bond and keep each other safe and enhances survival tendencies. Fear also being an adaptive biochemical strategy for responding to situations that could end an organism's life. And then like more metaphysical, love as like a universal bonding energy that brings things together. I saw this once in an ayahuasca journey so clearly. It was almost like love as a force of physics that like keeps everything together. even when it's not physically together, it's like the almost this magnetic force of the cosmos holding everything in harmony with itself and an expression of itself as this unified field. And then fear being a temporary misperception of separation, cutting off that flow of inherent love in the cosmic fabric. Yeah.
Wow. I don't know how to follow that one. That was beautiful. I would agree. I second that. And something that came through when I was feeling into love is like love as an allowing awareness, allowing all to be as is and as they are, as it is. And I was also feeling into a similar, as Max said, but I won't be so poetic, but just the connecting bond of the cosmos, of the unifying force. Fear, I still don't fully know how to define. I liked AG's simple, like it's a feeling of like a feeling response to a real or imagined threat. It's like this invisible essence, like it's so. I was getting into this conversation with somebody about if fear is an illusion. I said it's absolutely not an illusion. But then he was saying the thing that you're afraid of is the illusion. And I'm still like, I'm not really like, I don't know. It's case by case. But when I'm feeling into fear right now, it does feel like this sort of invisible force, and it is protective, and it can be an illusion, or it can be an illusory threat. Yeah. So I am in a place of still pondering what these things are, even though I feel like I know them so well, because they're feelings that are actually beyond words. I feel complete.
Would anybody be open to sharing like a breath or like a tuning in practice?
Seems like a nice integration.
Letting all that juiciness marinate.
Anybody else want to?
I'm down.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. I want to share a few more of those answers we got via Facebook and otherwise. Love is recognizing a connection. Fear is feeling separation. We got a thumbs up on fear equals nurturing awareness, 100%. We got a cosmic fabric. I'm guessing that was talking about love. We also got fear equals invitation to pay attention and discern. And I like this one. Love is quantum entanglement. Fear is the resistance between two polar opposites.
Nice. Thanks, Facebook. That's fun.
Amazing. Anybody want to?
I'm noticing in my experience right now, I think just watching the arc of our conversation, this really beautiful sort of merging of love and fear, both as felt experiences in my body and as concept categories almost too. Like there's this wholesomeness, and there's something so beautiful about making fear the object of our group attention for a period of time. And it doesn't seem like that's something people do very often. And it's kind of like, okay, we all obviously experience fear and have throughout our life and address it in our various ways and have learned tools and tactics and mental ways of addressing it and whatnot. But there's something so beautiful about, as a group, kind of investigating it together. Yeah. Thank you all for that.
Thank you for tying it in, for integrating.
May I jump in? Were you gonna say something? Yeah. Okay. I just was, as you were speaking and towards the end, Max, I just felt like, yeah, like we're really, to connect as human beings around fear is such an expression of love. Love for ourselves, to be even willing to like admit that that exists in ourselves, and then to see that in the other and to allow space for it to exist in the other, and then connecting in that way is so humbling and powerful. And I'm so glad that you spoke to it. And I'm just really feeling like, I don't know, like washed by that, cleansed. We talk about love as like the connecting force, and it absolutely is, but fear is something we all experience as well, and we don't talk about it. We try so hard to act as if it doesn't exist, or we let it completely consume us. And both of those is letting it completely consume you, actually. So one is showing it and one is not. So I feel very in love in this moment and grateful for this opportunity to talk about fear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a real showing of courage for this group and for everybody watching, for us to be with fear together. Like, it's a very courageous act that we can be with fear. And I think it's this kind of courage that's going to enable us, like the five of us, but also the larger us who's here, to move really powerfully in the world in this time, to be with the fear that is so alive and so real in this world, and to continue to move courageously for the good of humanity.
I feel really, really, really very peaceful right now. Probably more at peace than I've felt since all of this started getting real. The last week has been really full of activity for me because I made the decision to come back out to the family farm for the duration of this, whatever it is. So I know this has changed a lot of folks' directions and plans, so I'm not the only one. But it's been a lot of activity in the middle of a lot of uncertainty. So thank you for helping me co-regulate my nervous system. I feel better now.
Beautiful.
Thank you for sharing that, Cecily. And I have a similar share of feeling at ease. I came into this conversation feeling triggered after a conversation and shift in my housing arrangement happened like right before I got here. A new person was invited into my home and was not clearly communicated to everybody in the home. And of course, my fear receptors just went crazy. And now I'm seated in a space of I was not trusting the other people in my home that they were making a great decision. I was not in a place of love where I could clearly communicate what I was feeling, like what fears that were arising. I was afraid to communicate what I was fearing because I felt like I was going to come off as intense and all these different things. And after speaking on love and how love and fear can be so much of the same thing and just a different perspective on it, I'm feeling very empowered to once again go and clear up communication in my reality. And drawing from this conversation, I'm so grateful to have a space to drop in and to share and be heard and be seen. So the intentions that already come through. Thank you, all of you.
Amazing.
Um,
Amazing.
I feel like we just like naturally wrapped it up. We didn't even need to be like, cool, we're coming to time. We're just like naturally like coming to a close. And it's been almost exactly 90 minutes, which feels like such a good length of time. Yeah, and Michael, total resonance. I came into this conversation 2 hours ago. I was feeling afraid to have this conversation. I'm like, I'm not in the right energy space. I wonder if they'd all be okay if I just say, you guys wanted to do it tomorrow instead, then I could go and watch this other thing and be present. And I'm so glad that I did not act out of that fear. I'm so glad that we all came here together. I'm so glad that I reached out to see how everyone else was feeling, because when I reached out to you guys and you were all feeling good, I was like, okay, cool. Everybody else is feeling good. That means I can be in a space and can settle in, and it's going to be able to flow. And it did. And we came to some really amazing places. And I feel that this has been a gift to me. I hope it's been a gift to each one of you. And I think it has also been a gift to a lot of people. And a lot of people are really getting a lot of appreciation from the Facebook stream. We had like 20 plus viewers, like almost regularly, which is like, that's like amazing. So a lot of people were here with us, and I feel like we've cultivated a really beautiful energy and are continuing to bless the collective and bless the world through coming together in these shares and sharing from these vulnerable spaces and talking about things that most people aren't talking about. And so I'm just really grateful that we are able to do this and come together in the way that we are.
Thank you.
Shall we call it a wrap? Anybody else got anything else? Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you all Facebook viewers, everybody who has tuned in and been present with us. Thank you for being here in the conversation, for listening in the way that you are. Thank you for everything you've shared in chat and contributed, and many more of these to come. We're going to have another conversation in a couple days, which will again be open to more people, where we can go into some of these topics. And I think on last time we're talking about like sort of what we're doing and what solutions we're bringing in, and we'll also integrate all the energies that's been talked about thus far. So in a couple of days we'll announce that. It's been a pattern for them to be every 2 or 3 days at around 6:33 Eastern. So we'll see if that pattern continues. But yeah, so thank you all for being here, and we will stop the live stream there. Bye, Facebook world. Bye, y'all.
Bye. Thank you.